She didn't run from war. She ran from something worse. From a man who twisted love into chains, turning her home into a prison. With nothing but courage in her heart, she fled, leaving behind everything she once knew. In a new land, she thought she had finally found peace. But hatred has a way of crossing borders. Just when hope began to bloom, her past came knocking, louder than ever. This is not just a story, it's a roller coaster of love, betrayal, and survival. So grab your popcorn, settle in, and get ready. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on your notifications, because you won't want to miss what comes next. This is Bella's story time. Jessica's journey began years ago, but on that chilly morning, as she sat in the middle seat of her connecting flight from Addis Ababa to Seoul, it felt like she was just now taking her first breath of freedom. Her hands trembled as she clasped the seatbelt tightly, not because she was afraid of flying, but because every mile the plane covered seemed to peel away the layers of her past layers she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. The low hum of the aircraft filled her ears, yet her mind played a louder sound. The echoes of Tony's voice. Harsh, commanding, manipulative voices you never forget, even if you move across oceans. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of swallowing words, painting smiles, and covering bruises that no concealer could truly hide. Jessica had seen the red flags long ago, but she, like many women in her shoes, thought love and loyalty were powerful enough shields. He helped you when no one else did, she would whisper to herself whenever the blows, whether verbal or physical, landed too hard. Gratitude had been her prison, and Tony was its warden. It was true. Back in university, Tony had been her knight in shining armor. She had been a final year student on the brink of dropping out when the weight of tuition fees threatened her future. Tony had stepped in, paying her fees with no hesitation. When her father suffered a stroke and the family couldn't raise the hospital bills, it was Tony again who came through. Those were debts Jessica carried, not in paper, but in her heart. And it was those debts that kept her bound long after love had died. But there comes a point where even gratitude runs dry. That point came when Tony impregnated not just their housemaid, Dupe, but also his secretary, Laura. The betrayal was sharp, like a blade pressed into her ribs. Jessica remembered the night she found out her body shaking, her mind numb. It wasn't the cheating itself that broke her. No. She had grown numb to his endless affairs. What broke her was the sheer audacity, the level of carelessness, the disregard for her dignity as his wife and the mother of his child. If everything Tony did for me could be converted into a loan, she once muttered to her reflection in the mirror, then 15 years of heartbreak, humiliation, and scars have paid it back with interest. And so she filed for divorce. The process was long, messy, and ugly. Tony fought tooth and nail, his lawyers dragging her through court as though she were the criminal. His friends called her ungrateful. His relatives spat venom, accusing her of wanting to reap where she had not sown. Every step forward in court felt like walking barefoot on broken glass. But justice, though delayed, finally came. The judge awarded Jessica full custody of their 4-year-old daughter, Crystal Bell, citing Tony's reckless behavior and the controversies surrounding his affairs. Jessica walked out of that courtroom not as a winner, but as a survivor. Still, survival came at a cost. The house she received from the divorce settlement soon became a curse. Anonymous threats scrawled on her gate, stones thrown at her car, whispers of home wrecker echoing in the neighborhood whenever she stepped out. Friends, she thought she had vanished, leaving her to navigate the storm alone. When she realized she couldn't fight the harassment anymore, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She sold the house, sold 2 cars, pooled together her savings. Then, with trembling hands, she applied for asylum in Korea. Why Korea? Some said it was too far. Others said she was running away. Maybe both were true. All Jessica knew was that she needed a place where Tony's shadow could not follow her, where she and Christabel could breathe again. The announcement of the air hostess startled her back to the present. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for landing. Please fasten your seatbelts." Jessica's eyes fluttered shut. She reached for her daughter's hand beside her, squeezing it gently. Christabel, with her innocent eyes and quiet strength, had been her only anchor through the storm. At just 14, the girl carried the wisdom of someone far older. She had seen her father's rage, heard his apologies, and watched her mother's tears dry silently in the night. Perhaps that was why she sat so calmly now, earphones in, sketching something in her notebook as though the chaos of their past life had never existed. When the plane touched down in Seoul, Jessica felt the weight of her decision settle over her like a heavy coat. The city lights stretched out beneath the night sky, glittering like stars brought down to earth. A new beginning, she thought. But little did she know that beginnings are never free of their own battles. The apartment she eventually found was modest but decent 2 bedrooms, a small balcony that overlooked the estate's courtyard, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. Her next-door neighbor was not like the rest. His name was Juho, a widower with eyes that carried a permanent storm. He had a daughter, Min Seo, around the same age as Christabel. Their laughter sometimes echoed through the courtyard, 2 teenagers finding friendship in each other's differences. But Juho's eyes, whenever they met Jessica's Mana, were cold, icy, filled with something deeper than mere dislike. But fate has a way of weaving threads we do not expect. Though both parents disapproved, Christabel and Min Seo's bond only grew stronger. What began as stolen conversations after school soon became an inseparable friendship. And it was this friendship, stubborn and unyielding, that would slowly begin to chip away at the walls around their parents' hearts. Jessica could not yet see it, nor could Juho, but in that small estate in Seoul, 2 broken families stood on the edge of a story neither of them was ready for. The first few weeks in Korea were a blur of paperwork, language classes, and endless attempts to adjust to a culture so different from what she had known in Nigeria. The streets bustled with people who seemed to move in perfect rhythm, their faces unreadable masks. Jessica often felt invisible, swallowed up in a tide of unfamiliar words, strange foods, and social rules she barely understood. Still, she pushed on. She enrolled Christabel in a nearby school, one recommended by her immigration officer. The girl was bright, resilient, and surprisingly adaptable. While Jessica struggled to pronounce simple Korean greetings, Christabel quickly picked up phrases, laughing as she tried them out with strangers at the market. "Ioma," she would say, using the Korean word for mother with a playful grin. "You'll get it soon. Don't worry." It was Christabel's optimism that kept Jessica afloat. Yet beneath her daughter's cheer, Jessica could sense the shadows of what they had left behind. Nights were the hardest. More than once, she had walked past her daughter's room and found her staring at old photographs her younger self, between 2 parents who once looked happy. Jessica never interrupted, but her heart twisted every time. The apartment itself was comfortable enough, but it came with a complication she hadn't anticipated: the man next door. Juho was unlike any neighbor Jessica had ever known. He wasn't rude in words, at least, not at first, but in silence. The kind of silence that spoke volumes. He avoided eye contact, muttered greetings without sincerity, and sometimes slammed his door with unnecessary force whenever Jessica passed by. She felt it immediately, the hostility radiating from him like heat from a furnace. At first, she thought it was just cultural distance, but she soon discovered the truth from another resident in the estate. Juho's wife had been killed in a traffic accident caused by a visiting African tourist. Since then, his sorrow had curdled into hatred, and Jessica, by sheer coincidence of her skin, had become the vessel for his bitterness. He hated all Africans for that reason. What made it more complicated was the friendship blossoming between their daughters. Christabel met Min Seo on her second day at school. Both girls, though worlds apart in origin, found themselves drawn together by the invisible thread of loneliness. Min Seo had lost her mother and lived with a father who was always serious, always busy. Christabel, on the other hand, had left behind everything familiar and was navigating a new world without her father in the picture. In each other, they found comfort. By the third week, the girls were inseparable. They walked home together, shared snacks on the steps of the estate, and exchanged secrets that only teenagers could treasure. Their laughter carried across the courtyard, and while it warmed Jessica's heart, it seemed to deepen the storm in Juho's eyes. One evening, as Jessica returned from the grocery store, she found Juho waiting at his door, arms folded, jaw tight. "Your daughter," he said in accented but clear English, "must stay away from mine." Jessica froze, clutching her grocery bags. "Excuse me? I don't want her near Min Seo," he repeated, each word clipped and cold. "Find her other friends." It took all of Jessica's strength to keep her voice steady. "With all due respect, Mr. Juho, our children have a right to choose their friends. Christabel isn't hurting anyone." His eyes narrowed, a storm brewing in their depths. "I don't care. Keep her away. This is my warning." With that, he shut his door with a sharp slam that made Jessica's hands tremble. That night, she lay awake replaying his words. Fear crept into her chest, not for herself, but for her daughter. Would this man make life unbearable here too, just as Tony's family had back home? The thought gnawed at her. But as days passed, something unexpected happened. Despite his warnings, Min Seo continued to seek out Christabel, and Jessica, though cautious, couldn't bring herself to forbid their friendship. She knew too well what it meant to be denied companionship, to be trapped by someone else's bitterness. One Saturday morning, the girls were in the courtyard playing a clapping game, their giggles ringing out like bells. Jessica sat on a bench nearby, half watching, half lost in thought. Suddenly, she noticed Juho standing at his window, watching them. His face was tight, but there was something else, something softer, flickering across it. It lasted only a moment before the shutters closed again, but Jessica had seen it, a crack in his armor. Life continued in its uneven rhythm. Jessica found part-time work at a small cafe run by a kind elderly couple who didn't mind her slow Korean. She worked hard, saving every one she could, determined to rebuild her life from scratch. At night, she often sat on the balcony with a notebook, writing down her thoughts like a private journal. It was during one of those nights that something happened which would change the course of her relationship with Juho. There was a loud crash from next door, a sound of breaking glass, followed by a muffled cry. Jessica hesitated at first, then rushed to the door, heart pounding. She knocked urgently. "Mr. Juho, are you okay?" No response. She knocked again, louder. "Juho!" Finally, the door creaked open. Min Seo stood there, tears streaking her face. Behind her, Jessica could see Juho on the floor, clutching his side in pain, shards of a broken vase scattered around him. Without waiting for permission, Jessica stepped inside. "What happened?" Min Seo sobbed. He slipped. "I tried to help." Jessica didn't think twice. She helped Juho to the sofa, ignoring his protests, and checked his side. It seemed he had bruised his ribs badly. Her years of tending to Tony's countless drunken accidents had taught her what to do. She fetched ice, pressed it gently against the swelling, and instructed Min Seo to call for medical help. Through it all, Juho glared at her, his pride wounded more than his body. But beneath that glare, something shifted, something he could no longer deny. For the first time, Jessica wasn't just the neighbor he despised. She was the stranger who came running when he needed help. And though he said nothing as the paramedics arrived, His silence carried a weight Jessica couldn't quite interpret. There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than words. That night, after the paramedics carried Juho away, Jessica sat in her apartment, staring at the thin wall that separated her from his home. It was strange how someone could hate you so deeply one moment, and yet the very next, need your hands to steady them. She lay awake until dawn, restless. She replayed the scene in her mind. The broken vase, Min, Seo's tear-streaked face, the stubborn resistance in Ho's eyes as she pressed ice against his ribs. She hadn't wanted gratitude, yet a part of her expected at least a nod, a softening of his stance. But when the paramedics wheeled him out, he had refused to look at her at all. The next morning, Christabel found her mother staring blankly at a cup of untouched tea. "Ioma," she said softly. "He'll come around. You'll see." Jessica smiled faintly. "You sound so sure." "Because I saw his face," Christabel said with quiet certainty. "When you helped him, he looked like he didn't know whether to hate you or thank you. That's something, isn't it?" Jessica wanted to believe her daughter. She wanted to believe that even stone-cold walls could one day crack. 3 days later, she heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, there stood Min Seo, clutching a small plastic bag of tangerines. "Appa told me to bring this," the girl said shyly, bowing slightly, as Korean manners dictated. He said, "Thank you." Jessica blinked in surprise. She accepted the bag gently. "Tell him he's welcome. How is he?" "He's resting. The doctor says he needs time." But Min Seo hesitated, shifting on her feet. "He's still very angry. Not at you, at everything." Jessica crouched to meet her eyes. "I understand, Min Seo. Just take care of him, okay? And don't worry, I'm not angry at him." The girl's eyes brightened at that. She gave a quick bow and darted back home, her ponytail bouncing. Jessica closed the door and let out a deep sigh. It wasn't much, but it was something. A bag of tangerines and a word of thanks, carried reluctantly through a child. Still, even icebergs begin to melt, drop by drop. Life settled into a new rhythm. Juho no longer slammed his door when Jessica passed. He didn't greet her either, but the hostility had dulled, replaced by a guarded neutrality. For Jessica, that was progress. The girls' friendship, however, deepened in leaps and bounds. After school, they would sprawl on the living room floor with books scattered around, switching between homework and whispered conversations. Sometimes Jessica would peek in and see them laughing so hard they rolled on the floor, clutching their stomachs. It warmed her heart in a way she hadn't felt in years. One evening, Jessica overheard a conversation that lingered with her long after. "Sometimes, I hate my dad. He hurt my mom a lot. I hate mine sometimes too. He's always angry, but he's all I have. Same, but I think our moms and dads, they're just broken in different ways." Whispering, "Maybe we can fix them." Jessica had stood frozen in the hallway, her heart aching at the innocent determination in their voices. Children, she thought, see possibilities adults bury under years of pain. Weeks passed. Ho's recovery was slow, but his pride recovered even slower. Yet there were changes, small, almost invisible, but real. One evening, Jessica was struggling to carry a heavy bag of rice up the stairs when a voice startled her. "Let me." She turned to see Juho, his face expressionless but his hand extended. She hesitated, then handed over the bag. He lifted it effortlessly, set it outside her door, and gave a curt nod before retreating. No words, but the gesture was enough to leave Jessica staring at the closed door with a faint smile tugging at her lips. Yet, just when the ice seemed to be thinning, a storm brewed. It happened one chilly afternoon at the school. Jessica had gone to pick up Christabel early for a doctor's appointment. As she waited by the gates, she overheard a group of mothers whispering in Korean, glancing in her direction. Though she couldn't understand every word, she caught enough. Foreigner, dangerous, children shouldn't mix. The sting of prejudice was sharp, but what hurt most was seeing Christabel approach with Minseo, only for the mothers to pull their own daughters aside, whispering warnings. Later that night, Jessica sat by the balcony, tears slipping down her cheeks as she watched the city lights blur in the distance. She wondered if she had made a mistake bringing her daughter here. Was she leading her from one prison into another? It was then she heard a low voice. "You shouldn't listen to them." Startled, she turned. Ju-ho stood leaning against the railing of his own balcony, his face shadowed but his eyes watching her. "They don't know you," he said simply. Jessica swallowed hard. "Do you?" she asked quietly. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "I'm beginning to." It was the first time he had spoken to her without coldness. The words were not warm, but they carried a weight of honesty that made Jessica's heart beat faster. From then on, the air between them changed. They were not friends, not yet, but the tension had shifted from hostility to something uncertain. Like a storm cloud breaking, unsure whether to rain or to clear. But life has a cruel way of testing fragile beginnings. One Saturday, as the girls played in the courtyard, a group of boys began taunting them. Jessica watched from the balcony, ready to intervene, but before she could, one of the boys shoved Christabel hard. She stumbled and fell, her knees scraping against the rough ground. Jessica's heart leapt as she rushed down, but she wasn't the only one. Ju-ho was already there, his voice thundering in Korean as he grabbed the boy by the collar. The boy's friends scattered like frightened birds. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, Ju-ho knelt beside Christabel, checking her scraped knee with surprising gentleness. "Are you hurt?" he asked in halting English. Jessica froze. The sight of this man, her enemy, her neighbor, her reluctant rescuer tending to her daughter, made something inside her shift. Christabel nodded bravely, blinking back tears. "I'm okay." Ju-ho looked up then, his eyes meeting Jessica's. For the first time, there was no hatred, no bitterness, only something raw and unguarded. Something that scared Jessica more than hostility ever had. Because hatred, she knew how to fight. But this was the beginning of something else. Love, they say, is a strange visitor. It never knocks politely. It barges in when you least expect it, rearranging furniture you thought would never move. Jessica had not come to Korea in search of it, and Ju-ho had sworn never to let it near him again. Yet, in the quiet corridors of grief and survival, love had already begun its work, softening, bending, reshaping. After the incident in the courtyard, Jessica noticed a change in Ju-ho. It was subtle, but undeniable. He no longer avoided her gaze. When their paths crossed, he offered short nods, sometimes even a word or two in English. The hostility that once clung to him like armor was loosening, though pride kept him from admitting it outright. The children sensed it too. Their play grew bolder, their laughter louder, as though the invisible wall between their parents was finally crumbling. And though Jessica welcomed the peace, she couldn't ignore the unspoken question pressing at the back of her mind. Where is this leading? One evening, Christabel came home with Minseo, breathless with excitement. "Ioma, Minseo says her father agreed we can all go to the Han River Festival together." Jessica froze, spatula in hand. She had heard of the annual Lantern Festival, where families released glowing lanterns onto the river in memory of lost loved ones or as prayers for the future. It was one of Korea's most cherished traditions, and the idea of attending with Ju-ho and his daughter both thrilled and unnerved her. "Are you sure?" she asked carefully, glancing at Minseo. The girl nodded, smiling shyly. "Appa said yes. He doesn't want to, but I asked many times." Jessica smiled faintly. Children had a way of achieving what adults could not. The night of the festival, the city glittered with anticipation. Crowds lined the riverbanks, carrying lanterns painted with prayers, names, or simple symbols of hope. Jessica wore a simple hanbok gifted by a neighbor, while Christabel twirled in hers, delighted by the flowing sleeves. Minseo looked equally radiant, her hand clasped firmly in her father's. Juho was quiet that evening, his expression unreadable. Yet, when the time came to light the lanterns, Jessica caught him stealing glances at her. Not the cold, measuring looks of before, something softer, something questioning. Together, they lowered their lanterns into the river. Jessica had written 2 names, her father and the word freedom. Christabel's lantern bore the sketch of a sun rising. Minseo's carried the words Ioma Saranghe, Mother I love you. As the glowing lanterns floated away, Jessica felt an unexpected warmth. For the first time in years, she wasn't just running. She was beginning to belong. Days turned into weeks, and Juho's defenses continued to erode. He began greeting Jessica properly, sometimes even engaging in short conversations. He asked about her cafe job, her adjustment to Korea, even recommended a local market with cheaper produce. But the true shift came one rainy afternoon. Jessica had gone to the supermarket, only for the skies to unleash a downpour on her way home. By the time she reached the estate gate, her umbrella had turned inside out, and she was drenched to the bone. As she struggled with her bags, a voice called out, "Yeah, give me that." It was Juho, standing with an umbrella. Without waiting for permission, he took her groceries, holding the umbrella over her as they walked to her door. "You'll catch a cold," he muttered gruffly. Jessica chuckled softly. "You sound like my father." Something flickered across his face, amusement, perhaps. They stood awkwardly at her door, rain drumming against the umbrella. Then, in a low voice, he said words Jessica would never forget. "I hated you at first." Her breath caught. She turned to look at him, unsure if she'd heard right. His eyes, dark and earnest, held hers. "I hated you at first," he repeated, his voice steadier. "But after you rescued me that night, I became indifferent. Then I hated you again, because I felt you were making me like you." Jessica's pulse quickened, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Juho continued, his voice softening. "But now that I know you, I hate myself. I hate myself for ever hating you. Because your type..." He paused, his throat tightening. "Your type is rare." Silence enveloped them, broken only by the rain. Jessica's eyes burned with unshed tears. She wanted to speak, to tell him how much those words meant, but emotion strangled her voice. Instead, she gave the faintest nod, whispering, "Thank you." That night, Jessica lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Juho's words replayed in her mind over and over, each repetition sinking deeper. She had not expected an apology, not from him, not ever. But what he gave her was more than an apology. It was confession, vulnerability, the opening of a heart she thought had been sealed forever. And yet, she was afraid. Afraid of what this meant. Afraid of letting herself hope again after Tony had shattered her so completely. "Do I dare?" she wondered. "Do I dare trust again?" But every time she thought of his eyes, his voice trembling with honesty, the answer whispered back, "Yes. Maybe, yes." It was then she realized how hated had beclouded her from seeing how handsome Juho is. Their relationship didn't transform overnight. Juho was still reserved, cautious, often retreating into silence when emotions ran too high. But Jessica noticed the small things. How he lingered by the gate when she returned late, as though to make sure she was safe. How he sometimes left extra vegetables at her door after visiting the market. How his laughter, rare but genuine, began to surface when the girls dragged them both into shared activities. One evening, as they sat outside watching the children ride their bikes, Juho spoke quietly. "Minseo." She smiles more now. "Since meeting Christabel." Jessica nodded. So does Crystal Bell. They healed each other, in ways we couldn't. Juho turned to her then, his gaze steady. And maybe they're healing us too. Jessica's chest tightened. She didn't reply, but the truth of his words lingered long after the stars came out. Yet, just as warmth began to bloom, shadows from the past threatened to return. One morning, Jessica received an email from an unknown address. The subject line froze her blood. "You can't hide forever." Inside was a single message. "Tony is looking for you." Jessica's hands trembled, the screen blurring as fear surged through her. She thought she had escaped, thought she had buried the past under oceans and continents. But like a shadow, it had followed her here, and for the first time, she realized her newfound peace, and her fragile bond with Juho was about to be tested in ways she could never imagine.